And there was a particular problem in the evening peak. If you think about it, in the morning peak, going into Liverpool Street, everyone's getting off at the point at which the train's lateness is being measured. So there's likely to be less of a disparity between train lateness and passenger lateness. Whereas in the afternoon peak, most people have actually got off by the time the train is being measured for its lateness. And actually, there was quite a significant difference between passenger lateness and train lateness when we looked at East Anglia in this way. So what about the relationship between satisfaction and punctuality? Well, first of all, there is a strong and largely linear relationship for these commuters who we studied between the level of satisfaction and the level of delay. And basically, for about every minute of delay, passenger satisfaction dropped by 2 percentage points. And that started with the first minute of delay. There wasn't a sort of no effect, and then suddenly this effect started after 5. It started straight away. Satisfaction started dropping from the first minute of delay by about 2 percentage points for each minute of delay. So what are the implications of that? Well, first of all, intermediate stops matter. I mean, for instance, well, just to come on to the third bullet point, clearly that research was only about commuters into and out of Liverpool Street. So we're actually working with cross-country to look at long-distance passengers. And we're also working with Northern to look at passengers into, I believe it's Manchester and Leeds. I'm not sure exactly which area we're going to be doing. We're working with Northern in terms of commuting into one of those two cities. So we'll be looking at long-distance and commuting outside of London. But for instance, a train company like Cross Country, for them, they have described to us how they put a huge focus on lateness at Birmingham New Street, because a huge number of their passengers are are connecting at Birmingham New Street or travelling to or from Birmingham New Street. So it's quite obvious when you think of Cross Country that actually intermediate stops matter. But as we saw in a sort of commuter operation where people are leaving the city at the end of the day, whatever the city is, typically most people will have got off by the end of the journey. And so actually, if you're thinking about what your passenger thinks about your punctuality, then you've got to think about the difference between passenger lateness and train lateness. And perhaps what we need is some kind of monitoring intermediate stops and some focusing on it in order to drive passenger satisfaction higher. Then secondly, on the 5 or 10 minute threshold that's allowed in the public performance measure, clearly we've got to have a debate about whether the 5 and 10 minutes is the right measure. Clearly there are implications of that, so we're not sort of blind to those. But we need to have that debate. Are these the right measures? But at a very minimum, we do think that right time arrival data should be published so that we're clear about what the difference is and how that might be affecting passenger satisfaction. And as I said, we're going to extend this research to longer distance passengers. And clearly one of the things we'll look at is people who are making connecting journeys and commuters outside of London. So just moving on to managing delays. This is the big driver of dissatisfaction. It's how you annoy passengers. If it's when things go wrong, which they will do, and we all know that it's a difficult operational job to do to run all these trains. So sometimes things will go wrong. What can you do to minimise the likelihood that people are very, very dissatisfied? And I've broken this down into 3 areas: processes, systems, and culture. And in processes, there are a number of aspects I'd kind of draw attention to. One is handoffs between different parts of the network. I've been on trains where the care from members of the on-train crew when a delay has happened, a significant delay, has been very good. We've had train staff walking down the train, asking people about where they're going, giving them advice about connections, giving people as much possible information as they can. I've been on the very same train, which has then been terminated early at the next station, and you get dumped on the platform of the new station, and then nobody's telling you anything at all. And so actually those handoffs, the idea that, clearly, at some level, the message has got through that you need to look after passengers at a time of delay, but we haven't quite got round to the idea that we might need to look after them for the rest of their journey rather than just for whilst they're on that particular train. We have the 2-minute rule in the code of practice, that if a train is stopped for 2 minutes, there should be an announcement. Even if the train crew don't know anything about what's going on, they should say they don't know anything about what's going on and promise to find out and come back to people as soon as possible. But the question I'd ask is, what are the compliance regimes to make sure it happens? I've been on trains where it has happened. I mean, London Underground actually tend to do it within seconds of a stop. And you know, it visibly relaxes passengers. I've seen other trains. I've been on other trains where I've seen, because obviously I'm timing, I've seen the code of practice being adhered to absolutely perfectly, but others where it hasn't been. And the question that occurs to me is, what's the compliance regime to actually drive up performance in this area, to drive up performance in respect to the processes that we already have in place? And then on the move delays, there are frequently no announcements. You can feel the train going slowly. You know you've only got a 7-minute connection time, and nobody's telling you anything. And the question I'd ask is there a process or not? Let's be clear about what we want to happen to passengers when we have trains stopped, trains slowing down, trains running a bit late, because the information that gets to passengers isn't consistent. We have codes of practice that cover some of it, but those need tighter monitoring. We probably need more comprehensive codes of practice. Systems. The big thing is the consistency of information. National Rail Inquiries versus, and the customer information systems that we see. National Rail Inquiries has some absolutely fantastic products. I'm addicted to live departure boards. I'm sort of tracking how the train's going, pretty much regardless of whether there's a delay, just to see what time I'm going to get there. It's a great product. You can get it on your mobile, but not everybody knows about it, and certainly not everybody has access to it. But how is it conceivable that quality of information is available to some passengers but not to train staff, and that information isn't being communicated proactively? Now, and there are all sorts of, so that's the train staff. There's the synchronization with the on-train customer information systems, which are still showing scheduled time ticking across at the end of the carriage, rather than the information that's actually out there. And then clearly there's the information systems at the station. It's simply the case that not all TOCs have got their customer information systems synchronized with National Rail Inquiries. And then we also have a problem with many systems, it being practically very difficult in the way those systems are currently designed for them to be updated quickly, particularly in the situation of larger changes, altered timetables because of big events. So on-the-day alterations and big changes need to be able to be fed through much more quickly, so that all these downstream systems that passengers have got access to directly are consistent with the messages they're hearing through announcements and through the screens at the station. And clearly, it just seems to me obvious that we should have live running information at every station. It's now, National Rail Inquiries has described how you can get very cheap products, which are basically help points with a single screen built into them, that's basically accessing the website for the live departures functionality for that particular station. I've seen one at Ivybridge in Devon, which First Great Western are trialling, and I know some other TOCs are trialling these. They don't cost much. Clearly, we need it everywhere. Finally, culture. Passengers need speedy information to be able to make choices. I've been stood there, Manchester Piccadilly is a particularly favourite one, where because I'm the geek I am, I'm checking live departure boards, and I can see the unit that will form my outgoing train is so late that it cannot possibly meet the time for the departure that's shown on the customer information systems. Now, you could say that's a systems issue, because I've been told of one TOC that actually integrates their systems so that feed and that automatic update updates the departure time on live departure boards, or it's a culture issue that someone actually thinks about this and goes, no, hold on, we've got a problem with that departure because there's nothing to run it with, and actually updates those systems. So perhaps this is a culture issue, perhaps it's a systems issue, but clearly one that needs to be tackled. And then the consistency between announcements and the screens that you see at stations. Being there when an announcement comes over, but the screen's still showing something different. So what happens is that you have a huddle of passengers around the screen because they half heard the announcement, and now they're looking to the screen for corroboration and don't know what's going on. And so you've got to have a culture that actually it's not good enough to just do it by one channel, and you've got to have the systems and the culture that mean that the information goes out on all the channels. So just to sum up, Punctuality, the biggest driver of satisfaction. The industry has made huge progress. There's no getting away from it in recent years. But the next steps, passengers still want more. Despite all that progress, passengers still want more. And the next steps are, should be thinking about intermediate stops and right time arrivals. And then dealing with delays, which is the biggest source of dissatisfaction. We need better processes, perhaps more comprehensive, stronger monitoring of them so that those processes are delivered. We clearly need some improved systems. Where TOCs are having difficulty updating their systems quickly, that needs to be addressed. And then finally, we need culture, and we need the systems in place to make sure that all staff care and that there's ways of checking and making sure that they do. Thank you very much.